I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped outside that morning. My driveway looked like a construction site, except I hadn't ordered any construction. A massive hole, nearly 6 feet deep, gaped right in front of my garage, blocking my car completely. Dirt piled up like a small mountain on both sides, and I could still smell the diesel from whatever machine had been here before sunrise. For a moment, I just stood there, half shocked, half amused. Late for work, car trapped, and a crater outside my house. Then it hit me, this wasn't random. This was personal. I'm Detective Jake Miller, 20 years with the local police department, and I've had an ongoing feud with my lovely HOA president, Karen Whitmore, the kind of woman who thinks she owns every inch of this neighborhood. I sighed, glanced up at my front porch camera, and couldn't help but smile. She might have dug the hole, but she didn't realize she'd just committed a crime on a cop's property. All of it caught in perfect 4 kelvins. Before we dive into the story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now, and don't forget to subscribe for more insane HOA stories like this one. If you've never lived in a neighborhood run by an HOA, let me paint you a picture. Imagine the suburbs, perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, pastel houses, lined up like soldiers, and a rule book thicker than the Bible. On paper, it's supposed to maintain community standards. In reality, it's a power game one, run by people like Karen Whitmore, who believe they were personally chosen by destiny to police your grass height. When I first moved into Willow Creek Estates 2 years ago, I thought I'd found peace. I'd spent 2 decades as a detective, long nights, high-pressure cases, constant stress. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could finally exhale. My house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, shaded by oak trees, with a small porch where I could drink coffee and watch the sunrise before heading to work. For a while, it was exactly that peaceful. The neighbors were polite, the area was clean, and my security system gave me a sense of comfort. Old habits die hard. As a cop, I always install cameras around my property. Not for paranoia, just preparation. You'd be surprised how many times being prepared saves you later. Then came Karen. Karen was in her mid-50s with that particular kind of self-importance that seems to radiate from certain HOA presidents. Perfectly coiffed blonde bob, bright pink suits, and a clipboard that might as well have been a sword. She had been HOA president for 8 years, which in her mind made her the de facto ruler of Willow Creek. Her motto, compliance is beauty. The first note she left on my door was almost laughable. Your trash can was visible for 12 minutes past pickup time. I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she mixed up addresses. Nope. The next week, another notice arrived. This time for grass exceeding the approved length by half an inch. Half an inch. I chuckled, shrugged it off, and mowed the lawn again that afternoon. The next morning, I found her standing across the street, arms folded, watching. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about grass. It was about control. I tried to stay courteous. I even went to one of the HOA meetings to understand the rules better. Bad idea. Karen ran the meeting like a courtroom, snapping at people who spoke out of turn and using HOA bylaws like a weapon. When I politely questioned why the HOA charged $150 fines for things like non-approved mailbox color, her eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. From that day, I was on her list. The notices multiplied. Unauthorized security signage, unapproved window tint, failure to register outdoor lighting fixture. The absurdity was endless, and it wasn't just me. After that meeting, a few neighbors pulled me aside outside the community center. They spoke in hushed tones, looking over their shoulders. Be careful, one older man warned. Karen doesn't like being challenged. She fined my husband for parking too close to the curb, another woman whispered. Then when we complained, she said our Christmas lights violated color regulations. I asked them why nobody stood up to her. Their answer was simple fear. Karen had built a culture of intimidation. She'd threatened fines, liens, and legal action, things most ordinary people didn't have the money or time to fight. But I wasn't most people. I had training patience, and the one thing she didn't know, access to public records and contacts in city government. I didn't plan to use them, not yet. At that point, I still believed maybe it would blow over. So I did what I always do, document everything. Every notice, every email, every word. I had body cams, dash cams, front door cams, and even motion-triggered sensors on the mailbox. Some people collect stamps. I collect evidence. Over time, I began to see a pattern. Karen targeted anyone who defied her authority. A retired couple down the street got a fine for having non-uniform potted plants. Another neighbor, an immigrant family, was accused of operating a business because they sold homemade cookies during Christmas. She fined a man for flying an American flag that wasn't HOA-approved dimensions. It was ridiculous, but it also showed her mindset. She believed she was the law. Then came the HOA meeting that changed everything. Karen had just introduced a noise curfew policy that banned any outdoor noise after 8 p.m., even if it was just a conversation on the porch. I raised my hand and asked Karen, "Does this apply to your weekly karaoke nights too?" The room froze. Karen's smile stiffened, her eyes narrowing like daggers. "Excuse me," she hissed. "I just want to make sure the rules apply to everyone equally," I replied calmly. Her voice turned cold. "Detective Miller, perhaps you should focus on law enforcement outside of Willow Creek." A few people chuckled under their breath, but that was enough to make her seethe. After that night, the harassment went from petty to personal. Letters arrived almost daily. I was cited for having too many plants on my porch, for parking too close to my own mailbox, for using non-approved blinds. It was almost impressive how creative she got. Then one morning I found a notice taped to my door that made my blood boil. Failure to comply with repeated violations may result in HOA board action, including property lien. A lien over grass height and trash cans. That same week, she started calling the police department, my department, complaining that I used my police vehicle for intimidation. I should have been furious. Instead, I was fascinated. I'd dealt with criminals, liars, and con artists for decades, but Karen was something else entirely, a suburban tyrant with a clipboard. Still, I stayed composed. My colleagues at the precinct laughed when I told them. "Man, one said you deal with murderers and drug lords, but the HOA president might be the one that breaks you." He wasn't entirely wrong. The tension in the neighborhood grew thick. People started avoiding eye contact when Karen walked by. Others secretly waved to me in solidarity, but never dared say a word when she was around. I could have taken action earlier, filed a harassment complaint, maybe even a defamation suit, but that's not how I operate. I don't go off half-cocked. I wait. I watch. Because sooner or later, people like Karen always cross a line. And when they do, it's not emotion that gets them, it's evidence. I just didn't realize how literal that line would be. Until the morning I found a 6-foot deep hole carved straight across my driveway. And as I'd soon discover, that hole wasn't just a threat, it was her biggest mistake yet. If I thought Karen had reached her limit with fake violations and petty letters, I was wrong. The woman was just getting started. It was as if she'd declared a one-woman war against me, and she had a clipboard for ammunition. Every morning felt like a new episode of What Did Karen Find Today? One day it was a notice about my mailbox being non-compliant with HOA aesthetic guidelines. The next, a demand to replace my driveway gravel with approved neutral tone. She even sent a letter claiming my American flag was too large and visually aggressive. I didn't know flags could be aggressive, but according to Karen, everything about me was a threat to her kingdom. The fines started piling up, hundreds, then thousands. Failure to correct violations within 48 hours became her favorite phrase. She once hand-delivered a notice while I was standing on my porch. I smiled and said, "Morning, Karen." She didn't return the greeting. "Detective Miller, your recycling bin is out of alignment with your property boundary," she said, pointing with her pen like she was writing a traffic ticket. I looked down at the bin, maybe an inch over the invisible line. "You're right," I said. "I'll move it back precisely 1.5 inches. Her jaw tightened. She hated sarcasm more than anything. Soon after, she banned my landscaper from the neighborhood. Apparently, external contractors must have prior HOA approval, which was news to everyone, including the HOA's own bylaws. The landscaper, a young guy named Marco, texted me, "Sorry, man. HOA lady said she'll call cops if I touch your yard." I texted back, "Don't worry, I am the cops." Still, I let it slide. I wasn't going to risk escalating things with my badge involved, but I did take note of every ridiculous move she made. Dates, times photos, witness names. My notebook was starting to look like an FBI file. The next blow came during an emergency HOA board meeting. I showed up curious to see what drama she'd conjured this time. The room was full, neighbors whispering, trying to avoid eye contact with me or Karen. Karen stood at the front like a dictator addressing her council. "We must maintain standards," she declared. "Repeated violators bring down property values." She looked directly at me when she said violators. She flipped through papers. "I propose we place a lien on Mr. Miller's property until his violations are resolved." The murmurs stopped. I stood slowly, buttoned my jacket, and said calmly, "Madam President, you might want to review your HOA bylaws again. Section 3.5 requires board approval with evidence of non-compliance. I have documentation showing selective enforcement, falsified notices, and lack of due process." A few people's eyes widened. Karen's cheeks turned crimson. You think you can intimidate me with your police talk, she snapped. Not at all, I replied. Just reading your own rules. Silence fell over the room. One of the quieter board members, a retired teacher, cleared her throat. He's right, Karen. You can't just issue a lien without board consent. Karen shot her a look that could kill. We'll revisit the matter later, she muttered through gritted teeth. When the meeting adjourned, neighbors avoided me again, but this time it wasn't fear. Some of them smiled discreetly, like they'd just seen the school bully get called out in front of the class. For a brief moment, I thought things might cool down. I underestimated her. A week later, I was called into my captain's office at the police department. He held a printed email. Jake, he said, someone filed an anonymous complaint against you, claims you've been using your badge to threaten residents. I stared at him. Let me guess. The resident's name rhymes with Baron, he chuckled. We looked into it. Obvious nonsense. The file's closed. I thanked him and walked out, but that was the moment I knew Karen had crossed from petty to personal. She wasn't satisfied with HOA power anymore. She wanted to hurt my reputation, my career. At that point, my patience was hanging by a thread, but the detective in me wouldn't let anger take over. I'd seen people ruin themselves by acting too soon. Evidence first, action later. The more I observed her, the clearer her patterns became. Karen thrived on control. When someone didn't obey, she created chaos until they did. And right now, I was her obsession. One Saturday afternoon, I caught her standing across the street again, clipboard in hand, pretending to check something on her phone. My doorbell camera caught it perfectly, her zooming in on my porch, snapping photos of my address plate. I stepped outside and waved. Need a closer look, Karen. She froze, startled, then spun on her heel and walked off without a word. The next morning, I received yet another violation, unauthorized porch renovation, for what I had replaced a single light bulb. That evening, I went for a walk around the block. As I passed the community bulletin board, I noticed something new, an announcement for another HOA special session scheduled for the next week. The topic, addressing ongoing non-compliance issues threatening neighborhood integrity. Guess whose name was printed right below it? At this point, it wasn't even frustrating anymore. It was strategy. She was overplaying her hand. The more she pushed, the more evidence she gave me. I could practically hear the nails clicking on her own coffin. When the next meeting rolled around, I brought a folder color-coded chronological airtight. Every bogus notice, every photo, every time-stamped email. As soon as she began her speech, I interrupted politely. Before you proceed, Karen, you might want to review Exhibit A, proof that none of your alleged violations exist. She blinked, caught off guard. Exhibit B. I continued, placing another document on the table, shows that you've sent me 13 notices in 60 days, while the average homeowner receives less than one per year. That's selective enforcement. She tried to recover. You think you can make a mockery of this board? No, I said, smiling. I think you already did. The room erupted in whispers. For the first time, Karen didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, silent, face red as a stop sign. When the meeting ended, she stormed out without saying a word. A few neighbors approached me afterward, quietly shaking my hand. One whispered, "About time," someone stood up to her. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the kind to surrender. When control-obsessed people lose power, they don't reflect, they retaliate. The following week was eerily calm. No notices, no emails, no late-night surveillance from across the street. Just silence. I almost believed she'd given up. Until that Monday morning. I woke to the sound of heavy machinery outside my window. The ground trembled. A low rumble echoed through the neighborhood. I opened the blinds and froze. An excavator, right in front of my house. Workers in neon vests digging furiously into my driveway. I ran outside in disbelief. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" The foreman looked up. "We're with Willow Creek Maintenance, sir. HOA ordered an emergency utility repair." President Whitmore signed off. My blood went cold. "Utility repair?" I asked. "There are no utility lines there. That's my property." He shrugged. "We just follow the work order. Paid in full cash." Behind him, the excavator's claw tore another chunk out of the asphalt. My car was trapped in the garage and dirt was flying everywhere. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Years of police training kicked in. "All right," I said. "You finish your job, I'll finish mine." The foreman nodded, clearly uneasy. He knew something wasn't right. As the engine roared and the digging continued, I turned back toward my house, toward the camera mounted under the eave. Its red light blinked steadily. Karen thought she was making a statement, but what she'd really done was hand me the case of a lifetime. That morning felt unreal, like a bad prank that had gone too far. I stood in my driveway watching an excavator dig deeper and deeper into my property, its metallic arm grinding against asphalt and soil. The sun hadn't even fully risen yet. My peaceful suburban street looked like a construction zone. The noise echoed between the identical beige houses, and curtains started twitching as sleepy neighbors peeked out to see what the commotion was. The foreman, a weary-looking man in his 40s, walked over holding a clipboard. "You, Detective Miller?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, still trying to process the sight. "What exactly are you doing here?" He glanced down at his paperwork. "Says here we're performing an emergency utility repair, ordered by the Willow Creek Estates HOA president, authorized by, a Karen Whitmore." I almost laughed. Of course. I took the clipboard from him and scanned the document. It had the HOA's letterhead and an official-looking signature, but one glance told me it was a fake. I've seen forged documents 100 times before, same tells every time. Wrong font, no city permit number, and the contractor license listed was expired. Whoever prepared it didn't even bother checking details. "This is fraudulent," I said. "There are no utility lines under my driveway." The foreman frowned. "Look, man, I just go where they pay me to go." "She gave us cash up front, said it was urgent. Something about a pipe burst under HOA property." I pointed toward my porch. "That's my property line right there. Everything you're digging into belongs to me." His face paled. "Wait, you sure?" I nodded. "I'm sure. And if you keep digging, you're technically committing trespassing and property destruction." He hesitated, glanced back at his crew, and lowered his voice. "I don't want any trouble. But if we walk off the job now, we don't get paid." I sighed. "All right, do your job, but make sure your guys are safe. I'll handle the rest." He nodded reluctantly and returned to his machine. I walked back inside, trying to stay calm. The rational part of me was screaming to collect evidence, not to react emotionally. So I did what I always do, went to my office, opened my laptop, and accessed my home surveillance feed. Every camera was rolling. Front porch, driveway. Even the drone cam I'd set up for fun during the summer still had its feed active, aimed conveniently toward the street. I scrubbed through the footage from the weekend. Friday night, nothing unusual. Saturday, normal. But then Sunday afternoon, there she was. Karen, wearing her trademark pink suit and oversized sunglasses, standing on the sidewalk with a man in a neon safety vest. She was pointing toward my driveway, gesturing with both hands like she was marking territory. The man nodded, took notes, then she handed him an envelope. I zoomed in. Cash. "Got you," I muttered under my breath. Every interaction was time-stamped, crystal clear audio included. My camera's directional mic had picked up faint snippets. "Just make sure it looks official," Karen's voice said. And the man's reply, "You got it, ma'am." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't HOA enforcement anymore. This was fraud. Property damage. Maybe even criminal mischief. But I wasn't ready to call it in just yet. Not until I had every single piece tied neatly together. Still, I needed to get to work, and my car was trapped behind a literal canyon. So I called an Uber. The driver, a young guy with earbuds in, gave me a weird look as he pulled up. "Dude," he said, glancing at the crater, "you hosting a mining operation or something?" "Something like that," I said dryly. By the time I arrived at the station, I'd already sent copies of the footage to a secure cloud backup. Years on the force had taught me always back up evidence twice, in case someone decides to accidentally delete it. At work, I pulled aside a colleague from the City Code Enforcement Department, Mark Thompson, a no-nonsense guy who hated bureaucracy even more than I did. "Mark," I said, handing him a printed still image from the footage, "tell me if this looks legit to you." He adjusted his glasses. "Emergency utility repair," he frowned. "There's no record of this permit. Not from Public Works, not from us. What if someone forged it?" I asked. He looked up at me sharply. "Then that's a felony, Jake." I nodded. "I know." He tapped his pen against the photo, and if she hired a contractor under false pretenses, she could be on the hook for fraud and property destruction. "You sure it's your land?" I opened my folder and showed him a copy of my property deed and boundary map, right up to the edge of the sidewalk. "No easement for utilities." He let out a low whistle. "Then, yeah, she's screwed." When I returned home that evening, the scene looked even worse. The hole had grown to nearly 12 feet wide, 8 feet deep, and filled with muddy water from a broken sprinkler line. My driveway looked like a crater on the moon, and standing nearby, pretending to check on things, was Karen herself. She turned as I pulled up, her tone syrupy sweet. "Oh, Detective Miller, what a mess. We were just trying to help." I folded my arms. "Help? By destroying my driveway." She put on her fake, innocent face. "It's community maintenance, dear. You should thank the HOA." That old pavement was practically collapsing. I stared at her deadpan. Karen, this is private property. You had no right. Her expression hardened just slightly, the mask slipping. Well, if you're so sure, maybe you should read your HOA contract again. You might be surprised what counts as common property. Oh, I've read it, I said. Probably better than you. She tilted her head, smiling that smug, condescending grin. We'll see. And then she walked away, high heels, clicking against the pavement like she hadn't just committed a crime in broad daylight. I wanted to laugh. She genuinely believed she was untouchable. That night, I reviewed the footage again, this time cross-referencing every frame. Camera 1 had her conversation with the contractor. Camera 2 caught the crew unloading equipment at 5:47 a.m., before legal working hours. Camera 3 showed Karen peeking out from behind her curtains as the digging began. She'd even come out later to inspect the hole, hands on hips, nodding approvingly. The arrogance was staggering. I spent the next few hours compiling everything into a report. Photos, permit copy, property deed, screenshots, video timestamps, voice transcriptions. When I was done, I stared at the growing file on my desktop titled Operation HOA Hole. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about stopping a bully who had been terrorizing everyone on this street for years. Before going to bed, I stepped out onto my porch. The night air was cool, and the sound of distant crickets filled the silence. Across the street, I could see Karen's living room light still on her silhouette, pacing back and forth behind the blinds. She thought she was safe. But she had no idea she'd just turned a veteran detective into her worst nightmare. Tomorrow, I wasn't just going to fill that hole. I was going to bury her case in it. By the next morning, the hole outside my house had become something of a neighborhood attraction. People slowed their cars as they passed, rubbernecking to see what kind of lunatic had dug a canyon in the middle of a suburban driveway. Some even took photos, probably assuming it was one of those viral HOA gone wild stories. I didn't mind. Let them talk. The more eyes on this mess, the better. When I stepped outside, coffee in hand, Karen appeared like clockwork, wearing her usual pink power suit, a tablet tucked under her arm. She gasped dramatically when she saw the hole, like she hadn't orchestrated the whole thing herself. "Oh my," she said, pretending to be horrified. "Detective Miller, what on earth happened here?" I sipped my coffee, feigning ignorance. "That's what I'd like to know." She tilted her head, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "It's such a shame. I do hope you'll get it repaired soon. Otherwise, the HOA will have to issue a fine for hazardous property conditions." I smiled. "Thanks for the reminder, Karen. I'll make sure to document everything." Her smirk faltered. That was the first time she realized I wasn't rattled. I went back inside, shut the door, and headed straight for my computer. Time to dig deeper, pun fully intended. I started with the contractor. The name listed on the fake permit was Northridge Maintenance, a small, barely registered outfit I'd never heard of. A quick search revealed the company had been inactive for years, until 3 weeks ago, when it was reactivated by a new owner, Ray Collins. It took me less than an hour to track him down. Ray was a middle-aged guy with a receding hairline and a voice that carried a mix of guilt and desperation when I called. "Mr. Collins," I said evenly, "this is Detective Jake Miller, Willow Creek PD. I need to ask you about some unauthorized construction performed at my address yesterday." He froze on the line. "Oh, that job was from the HOA." "Everything was legit, really," I interrupted, "because the city's Public Works Department has no record of a permit and your company's license expired in 2018. Silence. "Mr. Collins," I continued, "I'm not calling to arrest you. Yet. I just want the truth." After a long pause, he exhaled. "All right. Yeah. Karen hired me. She said it was HOA common property. Paid cash. Said it was an emergency drainage issue. I didn't think much of it. She's the HOA president. I figured she had the authority. Did she give you any paperwork?" "Yeah, she gave me this letter. Looked official. Had HOA letterhead. Told me to start at sunrise and finish before noon. Do you still have it? I've got a copy," he said quickly. "And texts too. She even came by to check the site herself. Watched the whole thing like a hawk. Keep everything. I'll come by tomorrow to collect statements." When I hung up, I couldn't help but grin. The puzzle pieces were falling into place faster than I'd expected. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and began reviewing footage again, frame by frame, angle by angle. Every camera had captured a different piece of the story. Camera 1 showed Karen's meeting with the contractor, her handing over the envelope, laughing, pointing to my driveway. Camera 2 caught her watching from her window at dawn as the machinery rolled in. Camera 3 showed her walking by mid-dig, phone in hand, clearly taking pictures. Each moment was clear, time-stamped, and high definition. There was no room for denial. But I wasn't content with just evidence, I wanted witnesses. So I paid a visit to a few neighbors. Most of them opened their doors nervously when they saw me. Some looked relieved. The first was Mr. Jacobs, an elderly man who lived 2 houses down. "Karen's been a nightmare," he said in a low voice. "Last year she fined me $250 for leaving a Halloween pumpkin on my porch past November. When I complained, she said she'd report me for non-compliance with seasonal decor guidelines. I didn't even know that was a thing. Then there was Lisa, a young mother who'd moved in a year ago. She told me to remove my daughter's swing set because it wasn't approved color scheme. It's a swing set, for God's sake. I just stopped going to the meetings. They all had similar stories: fear, exhaustion, resentment. Karen had turned a peaceful community into a dictatorship. One family even told me they'd sold their house last year after Karen filed a false complaint about their fence height, claiming it was a security hazard. It cost them thousands to settle. It all fit the pattern. Karen's power wasn't about the rules. It was about control and humiliation. She wanted to remind everyone she was untouchable. But that illusion was about to crack. The next day, I went to see Ray Collins in person. He lived 20 minutes away in a small industrial park. When I arrived, he was waiting outside his office, clearly nervous. "Detective," he greeted me, holding a folder like it was radioactive. "Everything's in here: texts, payment, receipt, her written order." I took it and flipped through. The handwriting on the order matched Karen's signature on the HOA notices she'd sent me dozens of times. The text messages sealed the deal: "Karen, make sure you start before sunrise. I don't want him home." Ray understood. "Just to confirm, this is HOA property." Karen: "Yes, fully authorized. The detective is a problem. This will send a message." There it was in her own words. "Ray," I said quietly, "you're not in trouble. You were misled. But this is evidence of criminal intent." He rubbed his forehead. "I had a feeling this would come back to bite me." She was pushy, real bossy, made it sound urgent. "I thought she was fixing a leak or something." I nodded. "You did the right thing by cooperating." That evening, I organized everything into a formal case file. Case #2437, HOA President Whitmore. Inside property ownership, maps proving the land was mine. The fake permit, Karen's written order. Text, transcripts. 3 angles of video footage, witness statements, contractor's testimony. It was enough to make even the most stubborn prosecutor drool. But I wasn't done. I wanted one final piece: the confession. Karen was careful but not smart. I knew if I approached her calmly, she'd get defensive overtalk and slip up. It was classic psychology: give a narcissist a stage and they'll perform themselves straight into a cell. So I charged my body camera, tested the mic, and planned my visit. Before I went to bed, I stood on the porch again, looking at that gaping hole. The moonlight reflected off the water pooled inside. My driveway looked like a crater left by her ego. Across the street, Karen's curtains fluttered. She was watching me again. I smiled, gave a small wave, and mouthed the words, "Smile for the camera." Her blinds snapped shut. Perfect. The trap was set. Tomorrow, she'd have no idea that when she opened her front door, she wouldn't just be facing the neighbor she hated. She'd be facing a detective with a recording device and a bulletproof case. And this time, there'd be no escaping the consequences. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The air was crisp, the kind that carries quiet tension before something big happens. I brewed a pot of coffee, packed my folder of HOA concerns, and double-checked my body camera, fully charged recording, light steady green. Every piece of evidence I needed was already filed safely with a trusted colleague at the precinct, but today wasn't about paperwork. Today was about confirmation. Karen had lied, forged documents, and damaged property. She'd manipulated the neighborhood for years. But what she didn't know was that her biggest weakness wasn't arrogance. It was the need to prove her power. All I had to do was give her an audience. By 9:00 a.m., I was standing at her doorstep. Her house, predictably immaculate, looked like a magazine spread freshly mowed lawn pink geraniums, a welcome to Willow Creek sign by the door. The irony was almost poetic. I took a deep breath and knocked. It took her only a few seconds to answer. She appeared in her signature outfit, a pastel blazer, pearl earrings, and that smug expression she probably practiced in the mirror. "Oh," she said, coolly pretending surprise. "Detective Miller. To what do I owe this visit?" I smiled, deliberately polite. Good morning, Karen. I just wanted to clear up some confusion about that excavation out front. Mind if we talk for a moment? Her eyes flickered. Excavation. Oh, you mean the maintenance project? Of course. I was just about to email you an update. Perfect, I said, stepping onto her porch. Maybe you can help me understand exactly what kind of project it was. She gestured toward the street. It's a drainage improvement. You should be thanking me, honestly. That driveway of yours was an eyesore. I'm making the neighborhood safer. I tilted my head. Interesting. So, which utility company approved it? She hesitated just a fraction of a second before answering Southern Municipal Utilities. Emergency authorization Friday afternoon. I nodded slowly, feigning curiosity. That's strange. I spoke with Southern Municipal Utilities yesterday. They said they've never heard of such an authorization. Her smile faltered. Well, maybe you spoke to the wrong department. These things happen all the time. Paperwork gets lost. Maybe. I looked her straight in the eye, but their legal office confirmed there were no work orders, no leaks, and no emergency calls for this neighborhood in 6 months. Now she blinked, realizing the walls were closing in. Detective Miller, you're harassing me. I have every right to maintain HOA property. Except I said softly, that isn't HOA property. It's mine. City records prove it. Her nostrils flared. Those records must be outdated. The HOA manages all easements and common zones. Funny, I replied, because I checked the HOA charter. Section 4.2 driveways and private lots remain the sole responsibility of the homeowner. You signed that revision yourself back in 2019. Her jaw clenched. You're twisting things. I don't think so. The silence between us stretched taut. Then she snapped. You think you're so smart, don't you? Hiding behind your badge, acting untouchable. You're just another rule breaker in uniform. I'm just someone who follows the law, I said evenly. Karen's mask cracked. Her voice rose sharp and venomous. You know what your problem is. You think this is your neighborhood. It's not. It's mine. I run this place. You and everyone else here answer to me, bingo. I let her go on, watching her dig her own hole deeper. People like you ruin everything, she ranted. You come here thinking you're above the rules. I told that contractor to dig that hole because someone needed to put you in your place. My heart rate didn't even spike. You told him to dig it, I repeated calmly. Her face froze. I approved the maintenance. That's what I meant. No, I think you meant exactly what you said. Karen's eyes darted toward the street as if searching for an escape route. This conversation is over. I'm calling my lawyer. I smiled politely. Before you do, you might want to know this conversation's being recorded. Both video and audio. Her entire body went rigid. You can't record me without permission, actually, I said, tapping the small device clipped to my shirt. This is my front porch and a matter of ongoing property damage. Legally, I can. And I just got your confession. Karen's voice dropped to a hiss. You'll regret this. Maybe I said, stepping off her porch. But somehow I doubt it. As I walked away, she shouted something about defamation and calling the board, but I barely heard her. The recording was perfect, clean audio, clear visuals, time-stamped. I uploaded it to the case file before I even made it back inside. That afternoon, I met with Assistant District Attorney Lisa Monroe, an old friend from my early detective days. She listened quietly as I laid everything out: photos, documents, videos, text messages, and finally the body cam footage. When the video ended, she let out a low whistle. You couldn't have scripted that better if you tried. She dug her own grave, I said. Lisa nodded. You've got enough here for multiple charges: fraud, falsifying public documents, criminal mischief, harassment, and abuse of authority. We can have her in cuffs by tomorrow. Good, I said, leaning back. But I want it done clean. No surprises. No leaks to the HOA board. You got it. The next 24 hours felt like the calm before a storm. I didn't go into work. I stayed home tidying up the paperwork, organizing digital files, making sure every angle was airtight. Around noon, a few neighbors stopped by to ask about the hole. Is it true the HOA ordered it? One whispered. I smiled faintly. You'll find out soon enough. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I took one last walk through the neighborhood. The sprinklers hissed quietly, kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac, and for once Karen's blinds were drawn shut. No surveillance, no smirks, no clipboard, just silence. It felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in weeks. When I returned home, my phone buzzed text from Lisa: search warrant approved. Arrest scheduled for 8 a.m. I stared at the message, exhaling slowly. Justice finally. At 7:55 the next morning, I stood at my window, sipping coffee, watching two unmarked police SUVs roll quietly into the neighborhood. The officer stepped out calm and professional, heading straight toward Karen's house. I didn't move. I didn't need to. A few moments later, the shouting began. "Ma'am, step outside. You're under arrest for criminal mischief, falsification of documents, and fraud." Through the curtains, I saw Karen appear, hair unkempt, wearing a robe, yelling about her rights. She looked nothing like the pristine queen of the HOA now. Neighbors peeked out of windows, gathering in small groups along the sidewalk. Phones came out recording. The same way Karen had humiliated others for years, she now faced her own reckoning under the morning Sunday. As the officers escorted her into the vehicle, she caught sight of me standing on my porch. Our eyes met, hers filled with shock, anger, disbelief. I gave her a small nod. "Good morning, Madam President." She shouted something I couldn't hear as the car door shut. The SUVs pulled away, leaving behind silence and a stunned neighborhood. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, the air felt clean. No threats, no surveillance, no pink suits pacing across the street. The trap had sprung perfectly. And for the record, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved. Because bullies like Karen don't stop until someone makes them. And when that someone finally stands their ground, the whole neighborhood gets its peace back. When I joined the force 20 years ago, I thought I'd seen every kind of justice there was, the swift, the delayed, and the poetic. But watching Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Creek Estates, being led out of her home in handcuffs was something else entirely. It wasn't vengeance, it wasn't satisfaction, it was balance finally restored. The scene was almost cinematic. The early morning sun glinted off the police SUV's windshield. Two uniformed officers guided Karen down her pristine front steps as her neighbors gathered in clusters whispering. Phones came up. A few gasps echoed when the handcuffs clicked. "Is that really her?" someone murmured. "Karen arrested," another said, disbelief, heavy in her voice. I stood quietly on my porch, coffee cup in hand, watching it unfold. Karen's hair was messy, her pink blazer hastily thrown over a wrinkled blouse. She looked smaller somehow, no clipboard, no power, just another person facing the consequences of her own ego. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed to thin slits. "You did this," she spat, voice shaking. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The officers guided her into the car, closed the door, and drove off, leaving behind a wave of stunned silence. For the first time in months, the street was calm. But it didn't stay that way for long. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. Someone had already uploaded a video of the arrest to Facebook. The caption read, "HOA president arrested for vandalizing police detective's property." It spread like wildfire. Within hours, local news vans rolled into the cul-de-sac. When a reporter knocked on my door, I stepped outside, badge clipped visibly to my belt. Detective Miller, Channel 9 News. "Can you confirm the arrest of HOA President Karen Whitmore?" "I can confirm," I said calmly, "that an individual was taken into custody for multiple offenses, including fraud and property destruction. That's all I'm authorized to say." The reporter nodded, eagerly scribbling notes. "Is it true she dug a hole on your property?" I allowed myself a faint smirk. "You'll have to wait for the official report." That night, Willow Creek Estates was alive with hushed excitement. Neighbors who'd once avoided me were suddenly friendlier, waving, smiling, some even stopping by to check in. One of them, Mr. Jacobs, shuffled up my driveway with his dog. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, shaking his head. "You know, she fined me once for putting my trash can out 10 minutes early." "I believe it," I said. "She told my wife her flowers were too colorful for the neighborhood theme," he added with a chuckle. "Guess karma's got a sense of humor." The next week was chaos for the HOA board. Karen's arrest had thrown everything into disarray. The remaining members called an emergency meeting, this time without her. For the first time since I'd moved here, I saw genuine fear on their faces, not of Karen, but of what she'd dragged them into. The HOA's vice president, Linda Matthews, opened the meeting with trembling hands. Effective immediately, she announced Karen Whitmore has been suspended pending legal proceedings. The board will hold a vote to permanently remove her from office. The room erupted in nervous applause. Then Linda turned to me. "Detective Miller, on behalf of the community, we'd like to apologize. None of us realized how far things had gone." I nodded, expression neutral. "Apology accepted. But I'd recommend reviewing your governance policies. This level of unchecked authority should never happen again." She swallowed hard. "We'll fix it." The legal process unfolded faster than I expected. Karen's case made the local headlines for weeks. HOA president accused of fraud and property damage. Neighborhood tyrant faces justice in Willow Creek. When the court date arrived, the courthouse was packed. Karen showed up, flanked by a high-priced attorney, her hair styled, her blazer, immaculate, the image of control she desperately wanted back. Her lawyer argued that the whole had been a misunderstanding, that Karen acted in good faith to improve neighborhood infrastructure. The judge didn't even blink. When it was my turn to testify, I walked up, calmly placed my hand on the Bible, and recounted everything: the fake permits, the cash payment, the text messages, the video evidence. When I finished, the prosecutor played the body cam recording. Karen's voice filled the courtroom. "I told that contractor to dig that hole because someone needed to put you in your place." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Karen's attorney sank in his seat. She buried her face in her hands. The judge leaned forward, unimpressed. "Miss Whitmore, this isn't just a lapse in judgment. It's a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority." He delivered his verdict with the kind of cold precision only years of law can produce. Guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 12 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution for all damages, including the repair of my driveway and the contractor's costs. But the real blow came when the civil court ruled in my favor, along with 3 other residents she'd bullied. Between the lawsuits and the legal fees, Karen owed over $75,000. Within 2 months, her house was listed for sale. The once immaculate property, with its perfectly approved lawn, sat empty, a silent monument to arrogance. When the moving truck finally came, the neighborhood gathered quietly to watch. No one said a word. Karen stood by the curb, face pale, directing the movers. She avoided eye contact with everyone, even me. As she got into her car for the last time, I gave her a small nod from across the street. She didn't return it. Her car rolled away, and for the first time, Willow Creek felt like it could breathe again. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail from the county clerk's office. Inside was a letter confirming the restitution payment and an official apology from the new HOA board. They'd even voted to implement a transparency policy requiring all HOA spending and violations to be reviewed by an independent auditor. I pinned the letter to my bulletin board next to a photo of the repaired driveway. The asphalt was smooth, black, and flawless, better than before. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it, remembering the chaos that used to fill this street. The pink-suited tyrant with her clipboard, the endless notices, the whispered fear. All gone now. Instead, kids played in front yards again. People waved to each other. The Jacobs couple started gardening without worrying about color uniformity. The place finally felt like a neighborhood instead of a dictatorship. One evening, Linda from the new HOA board knocked on my door. She looked nervous but determined. "Detective, we're renaming the community park," she said. "We'd like your input." I raised an eyebrow. "Renaming it," she smiled faintly. "We thought it'd be fitting to call it Freedom Park. You know, in honor of recent events." I couldn't help but laugh. "I like it." She handed me a small plaque mock-up. At the bottom, in smaller print, it read, "Justice thrives where fear fails." I nodded. "Keep it that way." As she walked away, I looked out over the peaceful cul-de-sac, the golden light spilling over rooftops, the laughter of kids echoing down the street. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone who'd ever been silenced by someone like Karen. She'd tried to bury me with a hole, but all she did was dig her own downfall. And this time, there wasn't a clipboard in the world that could save her. 6 months later, if you drove through Willow Creek Estates, you'd never believe the chaos that once ruled this place. The lawns were still trimmed, the homes still neatly lined, but there was something new in the air, something Karen had spent years stamping out. Laughter, freedom, community. I woke up early that morning, sunlight spilling through the blinds, and stepped outside with my coffee. The birds were loud, the street was calm, and for once there was no pink-suited tyrant pacing across the road taking notes on people's hedges. Just peace. The hole that had once been a symbol of her power trip was now a smooth, freshly paved driveway, better than new. I'd had it resurfaced by a contractor I actually trusted, and we even landscaped the sides with rose bushes. Every time I looked at it, it reminded me that justice, though slow, was worth waiting for. The HOA board had changed completely. Gone were the fear-driven cronies who nodded at every one of Karen's insane demands. The new president, Linda Matthews, was a practical woman, polite, transparent, and most importantly, sane. The new bylaws were open to all residents. Fines had to be approved by a full vote. And best of all, the HOA newsletter now opened with the words, "Serving, not controlling our community." I'd kept my distance from the meetings, but Linda often dropped by to give updates. We finally repealed the color code restriction, she told me one afternoon. People can actually paint their doors something other than beige now. I laughed. "What a radical idea," she smiled. You'd be surprised how happy it's made people. The neighborhood truly had transformed. Kids played soccer on the lawns again. Neighbors shared tools, hosted barbecues, and swapped gardening tips without worrying about getting fined. Even the old man across the street who used to avoid eye contact now waved cheerfully every morning. It was strange, the absence of tension felt almost loud. For so long, Karen's shadow had hung over this place. Now that it was gone, people seemed to be rediscovering what it meant to live like neighbors, not subjects. One evening, I was walking my dog when I noticed a for sale sign had gone up in front of Karen's old house. It had sat empty for months, the lawn's slowly overgrown paint peeling from the shutters. There was something poetic about it, her once perfect home becoming the very thing she'd punished others for. A week later, a moving truck arrived. A young family stepped out, a couple in their 30s with 2 little kids and a Labrador puppy. They waved as I walked by. "Hi there," the husband called out. "We're the Parkers. Just moved in from Denver. Welcome to Willow Creek," I said, smiling. "You picked a great neighborhood. It's a lot friendlier these days." The wife laughed. "Oh, good. We heard some interesting stories about the previous HOA president." I grinned. "Let's just say she took her job a little too seriously." They laughed, and the husband asked any advice for newcomers. "Yeah," I said, glancing at the freshly repaired driveway across the street. "If anyone ever tells you they're in charge of your property, tell them to check the law." They chuckled, not realizing how literal that advice once was. A few days later, I got a call from ADA, Lisa Monroe, the prosecutor who'd handled Karen's case. "Hey, detective," she said. "Thought you'd like an update. Please tell me it's good news." "Oh, it's better than good," she replied. "Remember how one of your neighbors mentioned Karen might have been embezzling HOA funds?" I nodded. "The rumor from the HOA accountant turns out it's true. The audit you requested uncovered over $40 0 inches missing funds siphoned through maintenance reimbursements that never existed. We reopened the investigation. The judge added restitution to her sentence." I let out a low whistle. "She really dug deep, didn't she?" Lisa chuckled. "Deep enough to bury herself. She's serving time in county now, 6 months, minimum probation afterward. Her reputation's shot. That's one hole she won't climb out of." "Nope. Anyway, just thought you deserved to hear it first. You did good, Jake." When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the quiet street. It was strange how poetic it all felt. The woman who spent years burying others under threats and fines had finally buried herself under her own arrogance. Weeks passed, and life found its rhythm again. Work at the precinct stayed steady, the usual cases, nothing personal this time. But every once in a while I'd catch myself glancing at the security monitors, the same ones that caught Karen's downfall, and feel a quiet satisfaction. Not pride, just relief. Late one night I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sprinklers flicker across the lawns. Across the street, the Parkers' kids had left chalk drawings on the sidewalk, suns, stick figures, and a big uneven heart. It was such a small thing, but it hit me harder than I expected. For years, this street had been ruled by fear of letters, fines, gossip. Now it was just normal. And that was the victory I didn't know I needed. A few months later, Linda stopped by, again, carrying a clipboard, not the Karen kind, thankfully. "Jake," she said, smiling, "we finished the park renovation project. Thought you might want to see it." We walked a few blocks down to the community park, the one that had once been called Whitmore Garden in Karen's honor. The sign was gone. In its place stood a new one: Freedom Park. Respect grows where control fails. I couldn't help but laugh softly. "You kept the line." Linda nodded. "It felt right. You reminded all of us that rules should protect people, not punish them." I stared at the plaque for a long moment. The air smelled like cut grass and summer. Kids were laughing near the swings, dogs barked, and neighbors chatted on benches. For the first time since moving here, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. "Looks like you've built a good community," I said finally. Linda smiled. "We all did, including you." That night I sat at my desk and opened the old folder on my computer labeled HOA Whole Case. I scrolled through the evidence, screenshots, permits, emails, the footage of Karen's angry confession. It was all still there, untouched. I hovered over the delete button for a moment, then closed the folder instead. Maybe someday I'd tell this story again, not out of spite, but as a reminder that calm persistence beats loud arrogance every time. As I got up to head to bed, I glanced out the window one last time. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, exactly the way I dreamed it would be when I first bought this house. I took a deep breath, smiled, and whispered to myself, "She tried to bury me, but all she did was plant me deeper." If this whole ordeal taught me anything, it's that power doesn't reveal character, it amplifies it. Karen wasn't born a villain. She was just someone who believed control equaled respect. But real respect doesn't come from rules or titles or fear. It comes from fairness, from decency, from knowing when to stop digging before you hit bedrock. When life hands you a Karen, don't fight fire with fire. Document. Stay calm. Let truth and patience do the heavy lifting. Because bullies thrive on chaos, and nothing scares them more than someone who refuses to play their game. These days, when I walk through Willow Creek, I see more than houses. I see freedom, the kind that grows when people finally stand up, speak out, and reclaim their peace. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living so well they have to move away.